What's going on, guys? Welcome back. It's Dr. Andy Chen. I'm just gonna be grabbing some coffee at Kinship, and then we're gonna be sitting down and talking about why people experience pain in multiple body parts and what we can do about it. I'll do the Colombia, the Cocoa Red Grape Itango Reserve. Coffee. Nice hints of apricot. Got the cocoa for sure. Really, really good. So, what are we talking about again? We're talking about people that have pain in multiple body parts, why it might happen, and things that we can do about it. So I'm gonna give you guys kind of like a really sciencey explanation, but like talk about it in like layman's terms, but still give you the term. I think one of the most common things is when you experience pain for a long period of time, the nervous system becomes very sensitized. So what was previously, not something that would give you discomfort or kind of push you over some sort of, it's an arbitrary threshold because there's really no way of measuring it. When you get sensitized, that threshold becomes lower, and we call that allodynia. So allodynia is basically stimuluses or things that you would normally not feel, very harmful or painful, all of a sudden starts to become uncomfortable. So now imagine like before, when you would wake up in the morning and you put on your shoes, you wouldn't think much about it. But now you're having back pain, and you've had it for maybe months, years, and putting on your shoes is something that was once really, really provocative. You kind of remember that, especially if that's something that triggered your pain before. And the more you focus on it, the more you become hypervigilant of putting on something as simple as your shoes, the more it can become uncomfortable. So that's definitely one way, and that's a sciencey way of explaining it. Other things that can kind of trigger multiple body parts aching is when you get injured, you kind of resort to certain movement patterns that are gonna protect that area. So think about it like this: if you get an ankle sprain, you're gonna wanna offload that ankle, and you're gonna start favoring the left side. And if that ankle sprain happens chronically, you're gonna chronically offload that right side and probably spend more time on your left side. If you have a physical therapist or a provider that doesn't really see these patterns and they don't make sure that there's like a similar strength and function side to side, mobility and everything else, these compensations can happen long over time, and then you start to experience maybe knee pain, you start to experience hip pain, maybe you start to experience back pain. So a super common thing I'll get actually is I'll have runners that come in and they tell me that they're experiencing knee and hip pain. And to start taking a deep dive, getting to know them a little bit better. And they won't tell me, I'm like, do you have any injuries or stuff like that? They're like, oh no, I've never been injured, everything's good. And we keep going through the assessment, and I'll start to assess their plyometrics. I'll start to assess their bounce, single leg hops and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, the way you do your pogo jumps, the way you move when things become more elastic looks way better on the left side compared to the right side. And then, oh doc, forgot to mention I've had like 10 ankle sprains on the right side. It's like, okay, that's really useful to know, but these things usually show up in an assessment if you know what you're looking for. So now how does that affect something like knee pain or hip pain or back pain? Whenever you're running, you're putting 4 to 6 times your body weight on one leg. So if you don't have the elasticity or the strength, the function, the capacity in that ankle to recycle 50% of the ground reaction forces coming up your leg, then you're just taking more force, and I don't want to say trauma because that seems super, super scary, but you're having more stress at the knee and the hip and the back that would have otherwise been recycled in your foot and your ankle. And there's a really, really cool research paper from like 1987 called The Arches of the Feet, and it talks about how 50% of the forces from the ground get recycled at the foot and the ankle. So if that's not optimized over time, it's almost like, yeah, of course, I can see how someone might get ankle pain, knee pain, hip pain, and also back pain on one side. So that's the other, thought process. Now, kind of breaking down like what you can do about it. This is a loaded question, but let's use the first case scenario, right? Something where movements are really sensitized and you're just kind of nervous, very vigilant about things. This is where we go into, I don't want to say psychology, but we're not trying to make a change in like someone physically getting stronger, more so than making someone's nervous system feel safer to move. So let's say it's uncomfortable to bend down and touch a shoe off the ground. Maybe I might elevate a kettlebell on a couple of plates so it's higher. Then as we keep doing that movement over time, it starts to get a little bit easier. You start to wonder like, hey, it's not dangerous. I can keep doing this and it's not a bad thing to do. and then you gradually decrease the bumper plates or whatever you have it elevated on, so it's lower and lower and lower to the floor. 2 to 4 weeks, 6 weeks, I don't know the time frame, but down the line you keep doing this and making yourself feel safe. You're like, holy crap, I'm picking something off the floor. And if you do it in these small incremental steps, it doesn't seem like a crazy thing for you to do. Whereas like if you just go from 0 to 100, your body's like, it's gonna guard up and it's gonna try to protect the area. So for the first step, I would definitely think about graded exposure, gradually exposing your body to more and doing it in ways that make you feel safe. Now the second part, which is gonna play a little bit to the first part as well, is if you have certain movement strategies that you're kind of predisposed to based off of your injury history, we gotta identify what the movement strategies are. And if you take these movement strategies over time, you might have certain deficits or mobility, I don't wanna say dysfunction. I'm gonna tell you, there's always like certain things like coded into my system from physical therapy school, like saying things like dysfunction and making people feel like they're really crippled and sick. And I still say it from time to time and I hate it. But it's just, you lose range of motion in certain places and you might not move as well in certain ways and you might feel tight. And identifying these like movement strategies and giving you what you don't have can let you distribute that stress to multiple areas. So in the example of like the runner, if every single time their foot hits the ground, they can't, recycle that energy from the ground and change it to, kinetic energy and to propel yourself forward. Now you got a lot of stress to the knees and the hips. That's one movement strategy. You're too compliant. You're like, you hit the floor and you just keep hitting the floor, and you see it where people like the hips drop all the time. Stress is being distributed to the same area. Take another person now with maybe a little bit more stiffness in the Achilles, stiffness in their foot and ankle, and they can recycle that force. Every single time they hit the ground, it's like a spring. It's recoiling off the ground. So that's another movement strategy, and it's a more efficient one. Other times you can think about people that have like extension sensitive back pain when every time they come into a squat. If they don't have any hip internal rotation in their hips, as they go into a deeper squat, they might start to either arch from their lower back or push their knees out. Over time, you constantly do the same movement strategy, you put stress to the same area. Not necessarily a bad thing, but if that's your only strategy and that strategy is sensitive, then you're gonna be sensitive. So all we'll do is identify what the strategies are, look at what the limitations are from a mobility standpoint, from a strength standpoint, address those deficits and see what happens. And I always say see what happens because everything's an experiment. I can't say for sure, but I'm gonna give you the most likely cause of, why you're experiencing what you're experiencing. And for me, the likely cause is what's related to your story. And that's why we spend so much time getting to know somebody, because if I have no idea who you are, I'm not gonna be able to treat you that well. I can't give you top 3 exercises for back pain because there's a million reasons why you have back pain. Likewise, you can plug and play any body part. So those are 2 ways why people might experience pain in multiple body areas, 2 ways of looking at it and how they're connected. And even the answer to the second scenario relates to the answer to the first scenario, right? Because if you're always in that same movement strategy that's sensitive, if I give you a different movement strategy, now you can move a little bit more freely. Hope that was helpful. I gotta finish this coffee. Enjoy.